We are awakening together. This is our weekly gathering we hold online. For more information, visit our website, awakening-together.org. We'd love to see you there.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Let me change my view. You may want to look at me, but I don't. There we go. I want to look at you guys. How are y'all? Well, happy Sunday. Last Sunday of September, I fear to say. October is right around the corner. Here we go. I'm looking out on the mountains now, and all of the aspens, you can tell, are really gold here. So, at least here in Colorado, we are heading directly into autumn. This morning, I'm going to share a homily called When the Mind Goes Crazy. Basically, there are some very dark times that can occur on the spiritual path. It would be nice if it wasn't true, but it's just not the truth. There are some very dark times that can occur on the spiritual path. And oftentimes, if not every time, the darkest of times is what's leading to our next breakthrough. There's a line in A Course in Miracles that says something like, you don't know your advances from your retreats. And that's because when we go into these really dark times, they feel like a retreat. They feel like we failed somehow. They feel like something's really, really wrong, when actually we are moving forward. And what's most important during these super dark times, I've called them ego attacks before. This is the term that I personally use. What's super important during these very dark times is that we learn how to recognize them for what they are, mind trips and nothing more, and learn how to be with them so that we do move through them to the breakthrough that's about to occur, instead of retreating, instead of tucking our tail between our legs and running away. So, although this isn't the most fun topic to talk about, this is the topic I'm going to talk about today. And in fact, some of what I'm going to say is so damn important, you might want to write it down. Because when you need it the most, you might want to have this in case of emergency piece of paper that you go get and pull out, right? So I just wanted to tell you that so that you could be prepared. But let's go ahead and start. This is a celebration because it's a celebration of awakening, even though we're talking about the dark times. So let's start by joyously greeting one another while Marisol plays Awakening by Deborah Pramal and Mitten. All right. So first, I'm going to read Awakening Together's statement of purpose. And then I'm going to read the core value that I picked out as the value that applies to today's homily. Awakening Together's statement of purpose. We are an assembly of equals, joined in common purpose. Awakening to one true self. Within an appearance of many faiths, many cultures, and many symbols, we seek to discern one truth and to rest in its embrace. And then the core value that I picked for today's homily is core value number 5. We accept all forms. And by the way, I just want to say the reason I picked this core value today, the form that we're really looking at is not external form, like the chair or anything. It's really the thoughts, right? They're a type of form. So we accept all forms as temporary appearances, permitted through enduring awareness of self. Did you hear that? I'll just read that again in a slightly different way and how it applies to today. We accept all thoughts. We accept, not resist. Do you hear that? We accept all thoughts as temporary appearances. This too shall pass. Permitted through enduring awareness of self. Where is our attention? We accept all forms as temporary appearances permitted through enduring awareness of self. We live this value by honoring all appearances and all experiences while continually reflecting on changeless truth. So that's our core value. And hopefully we'll bring it to life today. We'll see how to live that. But first, we're going to move into our announcements. Right. Thank you very much for making those announcements. I'm always amazed at Awakening Together. As you guys know, I'm the founder, but from the founder's perspective, this was just this unknown guidance that came. There wasn't this full-blown plan, right? There was just this unknown guidance that came, and in fact, a lot of fear, and then just taking one step at a time. And as you guys know, there even came the guidance to retire, And so to sit back and watch how alive this organization is and how many people are involved and all of the incredible usefulness that is happening here, it never ceases to amaze me. So with that said, let's move forward. We're going to go into our opening song next. As you know, the name of this weekly gathering is When the Mind Goes Crazy. So I tried to pick a song that represented that darkness. So when the song seems kind of dark, that's why we're heading into the darkness. So the name of this song is Insanity. And I don't know how to say this last name because as my daughter always says, I'm such a white girl. So I will probably mispronounce this name. It's Insanity by Diana Esther Contreras. Hopefully I did okay on that. So Marisol, if you'd play the song, please. Thank you. I think that takes us where we need to go. So why don't we go into a brief prayer? I want to get right into this topic and use as much time as possible to look at it. So my only prayer is that you help us to see the difference between what is true and what is not true. Because in the end, that's really all that we need. The knowledge, the discernment, the ability to see the difference between what is true and what is not true. Amen. All right, so the reading today is going to come from one of Bernadette Roberts' books, The Experience of No Self. And it's coming from chapter 4. And of course, there isn't time to read all of chapter 4. So I've asked Tina Brown to do the reading. And what I've done is I've selected specific paragraphs. And I've asked her to read those paragraphs. We're going to kind of skip around, but it draws a straight enough line. What I want to do real quick is tell you where we are in the story of Bernadette Roberts. She has already had an awakening experience. And when she had this awakening experience, her identification with Bernadette, with a self, with consciousness fell away. And her very first experience was having no self-will, being in some kind of a flow that she needed to adapt to. In fact, if you know anything about Bernadette was actually very strong-willed. So to go from very strong-willed to no self-will at all was a major adjustment for her. So she went out into the mountains, into the woods, and went camping for months on end. And while she was there, she just saw this oneness in everything. She got into the flow of nature. She felt very one with everything. It was exactly what we would all expect awakening to be. It was magnificent. And then the snows came, the deep snows, and she had to leave. And when she left the mountains, she wasn't ready to go home, I guess. So she went to the beach and decided to camp at the beach. Now, at the beach, a different experience began to come in. this experience is what I call an ego attack. In other words, although Bernadette was in this clear awakening process and a clear breakthrough had happened, which brought her into this oneness, the ego was not done yet. And in fact, if you've ever seen Revolver, the elevator scene, in the elevator scene, there's this battle with ego, and then ego seems to die, and then it comes back. We're looking at the comeback here. So what followed this incredible awakening and this incredible love and oneness and flow was an ego attack. But Bernadette did not catch on to that right away. So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking at her ego attack, the point at which she caught on to the fact that it was an ego attack, and then how she shifted gears and moved through it. That's what we're going to be looking at. There'll be a couple of terms she'll use you may not understand. One is 3D glasses. When Tina reads about the 3D glasses, that's because after Bernadette woke up, instead of it feeling like she was in the head, she started to feel like she was up here. She called that the 3D glasses. Another term that she's going to use is icy fingers. That was the feeling of that insanity or that ego attack. So when you hear her refer to those two symbols, that's what they are. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Tina. Again, she's reading from The Experience of No Self by Bernadette Roberts, excerpts from chapter 4.
My first destination was a campground overlooking the sea. As beautiful a sight as it was, I seemed unable to appreciate the surroundings because I noticed a subtle change in the object now being picked up by the 3D glasses. Instead of seeing the oneness into which all separateness dissolved, everything now dissolved into an inexplicable emptiness. Where for so many months there had been something, now there was nothing. In time, this emptiness became increasingly pronounced and difficult to live with. Without an inner life or the slightest movement within, seeing had become my life. I was totally dependent upon it, and without it, I had not a thing to fall back on. But if the constant sight of emptiness was tedious and difficult to live with, it was as nothing compared to what I came upon one morning as I walked along the beach. Suddenly, I was aware that all life around me had come to a complete standstill. Everywhere I looked, instead of life, I saw hideous nothingness, invading and strangling the life out of every object and vista in sight. It was a world being choked by death, by an insidious void, whereby every remaining movement was but the final throe of death. The sudden withdrawal of life left in its wake a scene of death, dying and decaying, so monstrous and terrible to look upon. I thought to myself, no man can see this and live. My body froze to the spot. It seems the one remaining resource was my two legs that could still run, even though they felt frozen and immobile. I had to learn before how to move without any need for personal volition, which is to act instantly, without thinking, without any need for self-consciousness or willpower. Once again, it worked, and I found myself running down the beach. But as I did so, it was as if something else was running with me, forcing me beyond all physical endurance to run as you never ran before. You are running for your life, and I believed it. For myself, of course, I was too late. It was too late. For myself, of course, it was too late. I had survived this time, but who knows what tomorrow may bring. Fortunately, I could not think a moment ahead or imagine how anything more could go wrong. Instead, I tried to figure out where in the past I had somehow made a wrong turn that had brought me to such an impasse and landed me in this terrible predicament. All I could think of was that I had trusted God too much. But is that really possible? I used to wonder if I could ever abandon too much of ourself to God, or if there was a limit beyond which a man should not go. But we abandon our mind, our memory, our whole existence, forfeit all we know in order to come upon him, the unknown. It is one thing to abandon our will in the form of accepting trials and tribulations, but it is quite another to be without a will or any energy to call our own. To give oneself to God is one thing, but to have him accept it is a terrible thing, or so I now understood. The whole problem is that I had given myself to something I didn't really know, and why I didn't anticipate the present outcome is something else I didn't know. Thus, there was only one way to account for this predicament. In thinking I had abandoned myself to God, I had in reality abandoned myself to nothing. So yes, indeed, it is possible to trust God too much, but only if there is no God, only if there is nothing beyond the self. But if there is no God, then all along I had only been trusting myself. So which was worse? Somehow they both had a way of leading to similar dead ends. But if you can't trust either of these, what's left? That was the real question. If there is no self and no God, what then? I had just seen what then and couldn't live with that either. There's nothing blissful about sheer nothingness. Even declared it nauseous. So what it all boils down to is the fact that the only thing we can trust is life. Well, money, with a self or without a self, with a belief or without a belief, to survive, man needs money or material goods. It's the ultimate compensation, perhaps, for having no self and no God. We blame greed on the self, but it may not work that way at all. Materialism may not stem from the self, but from the nothingness that lies beyond the self. So when there is no self and no God, what else can we do with our lives but make them economically feasible? And for myself, I thought the sooner I got into this financial game, the better off I'd be. After all, life must go on despite our worst experiences of it. Back at camp, however, I was not so optimistic. I had a messed up life on my hands, and coping with the here and now made for some reason very bad days. I tried to keep busy so as not to remember what had happened. Above all, I stayed away from the beaches because there was no life there anymore. What I had to deal with now was this frozen self, the very idea of which I could be personified as icy fingers, of an unknown terror, dread that had a way of appearing when my mind was unoccupied. Though seemingly held in abeyance, I'm not sure what that one is either, and never approaching too close, I knew they were lurking in the background of my mind and were liable to appear at any time. Right here, I realized how totally my life depended upon the toughness and immovable stillness within. I knew that the slightest feeling of fear or panic in these icy fingers, which were like sudden flashes of light in my head, would evade my entire being, resulting in madness. But I had no control over this silence. It wasn't even me. Rather, it was all that remained of a self that was. Thus, my fate now lie in the precarious balance between the stillness within and the unknowable terror that could suddenly appear in my mind. To avoid any...
Yeah, you read a couple extra paragraphs, but that's okay.
Sorry, Regina.
I thought about stopping you, and I thought, what the heck, let her go.
Okay.
So, go ahead. You are supposed to read this paragraph, so go right ahead.
To avoid any possible confrontation, I tried, as I have said, to keep very busy, and with 4 children, this was not hard to do. More than once they had been my lifesavers, for despite all the quarreling, dirty rooms, and loud music, they always kept my feet on the ground and my nose to the grindstone. Right now, just being around them was all that mattered. Consequently, an upcoming date to make a retreat with the hermit monks on the Big Sur had to be canceled. The last thing I needed was solitude and silence. So I got on the phone and told brother there was no possible way my present car could make it up their steep hill. He laughed and said, if you could see some of the things that make it up this hill, you'd have to believe in miracles. Besides, if you can't make it up, leave the car down and we'll send Brother E to pick you up. So that was that. How could I possibly tell him about these icy fingers following me around? For sure, he would have told me to go to the hospital instead. The day I drove down the coast, a big storm hit the Big Sur. Twice I had to pull over and wait for a lull in order to see beyond the windshield. After the second pullover, I decided to stop at the next phone and tell them I couldn't make it. If it was this bad down the hill, imagine what it must be like going up the hill. Unfortunately, the storm suddenly abated, and by the time I arrived at the foot of the monks' grade, it had become a clear and beautiful day. I decided to wait for Brother E, who came down every day at noon to meet the mailman. I thought he could follow me up and be of help should I have any trouble. After helping him unload the pig slop, which the monks donate to their neighboring farmer, brother got in his car and told me to follow. In case, he said, you have any trouble, at least I can keep going. At first, everything went okay, but when we got to the worst vertical upgrade, brother suddenly set his brakes, got out of the car, came back and told me to do the same because he had to put a new blade on his tractor, which was to the right of us. Half over the cliff already. Now I did not know if my hand brake would hold. In fact, I was not sure how long the foot brake would hold. So I shouted to him, move it over because I'm going through. But how could he move over? To the immediate left was a steep embankment, and to the right a sheer drop. It was obvious that somebody had to give. What happened next be called the big squeeze. But once beyond this delay, the rest of the way up was a breeze. Arriving on top, instead of being relieved, however, I saw the whole situation as positively ludicrous. After all, my car was probably in better shape than some of the clunkers the monks were driving. Then, too, since my last trip, the road had been newly paved. So there I had stood, possibly the most reluctant retreat ever, to come up the hill, and had I known what lay ahead, I would have gone back down. We never know the time or place where our destiny will catch up with us. Nor could I have imagined why, for me, it would be here on the monk's hillside. One more thing. I knew I was going to crack wide open, but never having done this before, I had no idea what would happen. I lay there waiting, endlessly waiting for the crack to occur, while physically this thing was tearing me to pieces. Within, there was not a single movement, not a fear, not a feeling of any kind. At times, I tried to focus on this great stillness, but it never gave me any sense of strength or confidence. Instead, it was unconcerned, as if a mere fly were buzzing overhead. It seems that the body had been left to bear the brunt of the assault, which neither the mind nor the emotions could take part in. Yet, had they been there, the result might have been worse. I do not know. But so bad was my physical condition, I never doubted for a moment that only a miracle could save me. Yet I never expected one, didn't even hope for one, nor could my mind have formulated the simplest prayer. All I wanted to do was get it over with, to die if necessary. I was not aware of the moment when the dreadful thing departed, for the next thing I was aware of was a profound stillness, wherein there was no physical sensation at all. Something must have turned my head, because I found myself looking eye level at a small yellow wildflower no more than 12 inches away. I cannot describe that moment of seeing. Words could never do it justice. Let us just say it smiled like a smile of welcome from the whole universe. In the intensity of the smile, the light of the eye did not go out. Or was there a physical body to turn away? Finally, the great intensity could be endured.
Thank you very much, Tina. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on this story as an example of what an ego attack looks like, because even though each story is completely unique, there are components that tend to be the same, right? And what we want to look at is those components. And then what I'm going to do at the end of this homily is I'm going to point you to a story of an ego attack that I had. And I'm actually going to ask you on your own after the homily to go and listen. And even though it's a different story, you're going to hear those same components, right? And so once you've seen those components in Bernadette's attack, and then you've seen those components in my attack, that may help you to recognize those components when this happens to you. Got it? All right. So first of all, as I pointed out, Bernadette had an awakening experience. The awakening was not done. In fact, the entire awakening process, we would all like to think of this final awakening of happening in a bleep, but it seemed to occur over a couple of years for her. So first, what happened was this identification with consciousness or self-awareness, awareness of myself as a self, right? That's the first thing that fell away in this 2 years of final awakening. And that's when she had these brilliant oneness experiences, and there was no self-will, totally in the flow. I am not the doer, y'all like to say. That's when she really started to experience that. That isn't experienced before that falling away occurs. All right. So that's when she really began to experience that. But again, this thing wasn't over. This awakening process wasn't over. The next thing that happened in her distinct order, I'm not going to say it's always the same order, but in her distinct order, the next thing that began to happen was the falling away of identification with the body. All right. So the story we're hearing now is when that identification began to fall away. And what was happening was somehow the ego, and I don't understand the ego, I doubt I ever will, but somehow the ego sensed what was coming and tried to stop, don't go, stop. That's really what was going on with the ego. Don't go any further. This is a common component of an ego attack. So you can, if you're taking notes, you can write that down. The primary theme, the primary thing the ego is trying to say, and whatever it's saying, is don't go any further. All right, stop. You've gone far enough. That's the primary theme of an ego attack. So what happens is she starts to see through this distorted ego mind. Like when an ego attack comes up, it's kind of like it's like it puts a filter in front of your eyes and you start to see very wrongly. Not that we don't all see wrongly anyway, just on an everyday basis until we've awakened, but it changes from seeing wrongly, in a general way, to very wrongly. In fact, it reminds me of that line in A Course in Miracles. It's in the 2 evaluations section where it says the ego is suspicious at best, right? But it can also be very, very vicious. This is where the viciousness kicks in. And so what happened when this happened for her is, instead of oneness now, at first she started to see nothingness. It's kind of a gentle, almost a gentle change in the way she was seeing. But then it got more vicious, where instead of just nothingness, it was the life being sucked out of everything. It was death. It was a very dark, very fearful way of seeing. She says it was sucked out of, the life of beings like seagulls or whatever else she was seeing at the beach. And it was sucked out of the vistas, out of the views, right? And so this is when it started turning very dark. And when it started turning dark, these thoughts started coming in, which at first she did not recognize as not rational. They weren't rational. They were crazy. Of course, that first thought was run. You're running for your life. Run, run, run. You're running for your life, right? But the thoughts that really started coming in that I want to point out is, could I have abandoned myself too much to God? Can you hear the ego in that? Could I have abandoned myself too much to God? That thought arose, and she listened to it. She entertained it, which took her deeper into the ego attack, right? And as she went deeper into this ego thought system, she started saying, there is no God. Oh my God, all I was doing was listening to myself, right? I led myself down this stupid, crazy journey, right? I did this to myself. I'm such an idiot. And if any of y'all know my story, you might know that I had an ego attack when I first followed the guidance to leave my job and leave Massachusetts and move to North Carolina, which is where I was going to be scribing NTI and Inner Ramana and doing lots of amazing things, but I didn't know that yet. When I was making that shift, this ego attack came into my mind. I had sold my house. I had taken my daughter out of a school where she had to win the lottery to get into because it was such a good school. And I had not yet found a new house. So I was like in this transition phase in between. And the ego came in and told me that I was, I had fallen for all this spiritual crap, right? I mean, I had had a good life. I'd had a good job, a good house. My daughter was in a good school, and I gave it all up because of my own stupidity, my own listening to just myself. You see, that's the ego. And that's what happens to Bernadette in this story. I was just listening to myself. There is no God. I was just listening to myself. And then the next decision that she makes is hilarious. She still did not see it, which is funny. This is the point that maybe I would have seen it, that it was an ego attack, is when her mind decides, she decides, well, then the only thing worth living for is money. Now, the second that I saw that, I think that's what would have woke me up to the fact that I was in an ego attack. But watch for those kinds of decisions that are happening. I would call them turnaround decisions. So watch for the spiritual path. Oh my gosh, I made a horrible mistake, right? Watch for that. This is a component in some way. This was stupid of me. I was an idiot. I was just making all this spiritual stuff up. And then a decision to turn clearly towards the world in some way. Money, it was her decision. It might not be money for you. It might be relationship. Just get a damn good relationship and be happy. And who knows what it will be for you, right? But it's a firm turnaround from now the spiritual path is the crap and something in the world is your salvation. That's a component. So watch for that one. The story may be a little different. So the next thing that happens is she goes back home to her 4 children. And one thing I've always been curious about, because she's been not home for probably 8 months now. And she is also, as far as I know, at this point in her life, divorced. I'm like, who was with her 4 children? How did she go away on these 8 months of retreat? I don't find an answer to that anywhere. But finally, she goes back to her children, and she finds her children to be a welcome distraction, right? Because there's so much going on. And she just does not want to be alone and in contemplation anymore because she's so afraid of this ego attack. Now, she had pre-scheduled a retreat with some monks. And she decides, I cannot go on this retreat, because all that's going to happen is, that spiritual crap and I want money. And like, that's just the wrong way to go. But when she calls and tries to cancel, brother won't let her cancel. That's God working in the background, you see. She can't even get out of this, even though she's trying. So that's marvelous. So she has this story in her mind that she'll never be able to make it up that hill. Whatever, I don't know what this hill was in California, but she'll never be able to make it up that hill in her car, which I think is so funny because if you read the whole book, she was just in the mountains in a foot of snow and made it down, in her car, but now she can't make it up this hill. So driving there's a storm and she thinks, oh, good, this is my excuse. And then the storm goes away. There's God working in the background, you see. So like nothing is giving her the opportunity to back out, even though she wants to back out. She gets there and she's obviously not in the best of moods while they're driving up this hill. She even gets to this point where, the monk stops halfway up because he wants to do something to his tractor on the way up. And she's like, I can't stop, get out of my way, I'm going up, right? And she drives up the hill. She's completely consumed with ego. She's acting from ego, right? She still doesn't see it until she gets to the top of the hill. When she gets to the top of the hill, she says, let me see if I can find those words because they're brilliant. Arriving on top, instead of being relieved, however, I saw the whole situation as positively ludicrous. Like this is the point where she realized she was insane. After all, my car was probably in better shape than some of the clunkers the monks were driving. So the ego was even distorting her thoughts about her car and what her car was capable of doing. So this is another component. You can write this one down, is that the ego will terribly distort your way of seeing so that things that you on a normal day would not have been afraid of will seem fearful. Like when you're listening to my story, you're going to hear that two of my friends were waving to other people. And I was like, oh my God, I had this huge ego reaction to them waving until later I realized, wait a minute, I wave to people all the time. That's a ludicrous reaction to people waving to people. It's so first of all, this terrible distortion is happening. But then at some point, there may be a thought, probably will be a thought, because God is at work in the background that's showing you how ludicrous or ridiculous the way you're looking at things are. That's a component of Holy Spirit or inner wisdom. That's not the ego. That's inner wisdom trying to wake you up to the fact that you are believing the ego and you're going down a deep, dark hole. Wake up. Look, this isn't as bad as your mind is making it. So that's the wake up point. When you see this is crazy, I wouldn't normally think that my car couldn't make it up the hill, or I wouldn't normally think that waving at people is crazy. Something else is going on here, right? And that's when she begins to see it as an ego attack. Now, she doesn't use those words, but she sees it as something she needs to face and move through. And so what she does is she goes and she lays on this hillside. And I'm going to read to you a couple of the paragraphs that I didn't have Tina read. I want you to listen very carefully. This was her experience laying on the hillside, right? At one point, I thought it might be a raving, maniacal self wanting to get back in. Like, what is going on here? She's asking herself. At other times, it seemed only to be the fear of having a stroke or the fear of insanity. This is her mind trying to figure out what's happening because Bernadette wasn't educated in a way where she could just say, oh, this is an ego attack. Right? That's what's going on. And what you'll hear in my story is that I did have that education. And once I saw how ludicrous my mind was, I was able to say, oh, this is just an ego attack. She knows it's something, but she doesn't know what it is. She says, maybe it's fear of insanity. Maybe it's fear of a stroke. Maybe it's the self trying to come back. She even says, maybe it's just menopause. But I'm convinced it wouldn't have done the least good to know. By this time, absolutely nothing could be done about it. In other words, whatever this is, it's on a roll, right? Whether it's menopause, ego attack, insanity, it's on a roll. Whatever its mission in my life, it needs to be accomplished here and now. In other words, what she is deciding is that she needs to allow this. Another thing for you to write down. Once you've recognized it's an ego attack, that doesn't make it stop. It is on a roll. And what you need to do is allow it, of course, now by only watching it. And you'll hear that very clearly in the video I'm going to ask you to listen to from my story. Because the truth is, I was better educated about this because of A Course in Miracles. A Course in Miracles did a great job of educating me about this. Bernadette didn't have that education. So as soon as I was able to identify it as an ego attack, I knew I had to allow it and watch it. And that's what she's figuring out here. It's on a roll. Whatever it is, it's on a roll. And I just need to let it happen. The longer I watched these fingers, remember she called it the icy fingers, the longer I watched these fingers, the closer they approached, sometimes almost touching. In other words, it didn't get better. This is what everybody wants. Everybody wants, once I start rest, accept, and trust, it's going to get better. Maybe it will sometimes, but sometimes, what's going to happen? It's going to get worse first. So just your job is to watch, not wish it better. Watch, right? The longer I watched these fingers, the closer they approached, sometimes almost touching, then suddenly retracting. They seemed to be in constant movement in my mind. In other words, she's very clear now. When she first started, she thought the life was being sucked out of stuff. She thought that was happening. Now she's clear, whatever this is just going on in the mind, right? And that's what you want to be clear on too. This is the mind. Or you could call it the ego, because they're the same thing at this point, right? This is the mind. This is just going on in the mind. Initially, my reaction was only the appearance of goosebumps with a shudder now and then, but later my head grew hot, so hot, in fact, it felt like I was on fire, and visually all I could see were stars. It could happen that physical symptoms could begin to arise. I remember during one ego attack, I got very, very sick, horrible migraine headache, wanting to throw up. This can happen. I just want to say it. And you just keep right on watching and resting, okay? Then I felt my feet begin to freeze, with the freezing sensation spreading upward to encompass all but my head. Finally, I fell back against the hill in a convulsive condition with my heart beating wildly. You can tell she is having no fun here, right? And then Tina picked up reading again, where, she's watching, and then suddenly, in her case, it just stopped. And there was just silence. And then her head turned, and she saw this yellow flower. I mean, that was God, that yellow flower, right? She saw this yellow flower. Let me read to you the next two paragraphs, which Tina did not read. Are you ready for this? Because now it's over. Remember, I said we go through the darkness to the breakthrough? Let me read the breakthrough. It took a while to realize my body was still lying on the hill because, initially, I seemed not to have one. For all I knew, I could have been a weed or a pebble on the hillside. After a time, however, the body became obvious, and I decided to test it to see if it was intended to move again. Once more it moved without thought, only this time the return of physical sensation was accompanied by a mild shock. When I got to my feet, it was gratifying to feel the body as relaxed as if nothing had happened. Thus I climbed the hill the same as I had gone down the hill, but only physically. For in reality, something had gone down the hill, down to where the ego attack happened, that never returned. I'll tell you what that something was. It was her identification with the body. That's what died in that ego attack. Apart from the absence of the dreadful thing which I never saw again, I came up the hill without any sense of true existence, meaning that sense of life being tied to the body. Though I searched everywhere in what should have been my being, I now felt there was nothing substantial there, nothing left that I had not experienced as either dissolving or suddenly disappearing, leaving nothing in its place. As for that which remained when there was no longer identification with a self, no longer identification with the body, I had no idea what it was or even if it was, though something obviously climbed the hill, right? Something moved this body up the hill. It would be a long time before I discovered its true nature. For the moment, all I knew was that a great change had taken place. In retrospect, I came to regard this event on the hillside as an initiation into what I have called the Great Passageway, an unusual state of existence to be described in the next chapter. And I'll just tell you quickly what happens in the next chapter. In Awakening Together, we have learned awareness, watching awareness meditation. We have been taught, so at least intellectually we understand that what is awareness. Like that is the ultimate. She doesn't know that. So what happens in the next chapter is that her inner intuition, which she actually calls the taskmaster, because it's very consistent, very insistent. Her inner intuition keeps telling her to see, to see, to see. And what she keeps trying to do is look out. And it won't let her see that way because it's trying to reverse her seeing. And what ends up happening, her last transition in this awakening process, is she comes to see, she calls it seeing. She comes to see seeing as true life. We call that awareness. And then, of course, this awakening process seems complete, and then there's a deepening into that. But she comes to see seeing as true life. So, as I mentioned, I'm going to give you an assignment because I just don't have enough time to really, really help you become familiar with this. You've written down the components, right? What I want you to do is I want you to go and listen to my recorded ego attack and notice those same components. Literally have the list of components in front of you and go, oh, check, because the story's going to be different, right? So you're going to have to listen with discernment. But you'll hear the same components. And this is going to help you so that when your mind starts going crazy, you'll be able to recognize it and move through it more easily. When this ego attack you're about to listen to, and hopefully in the next couple of days, when this occurred for me, what had happened is I had described all of NTI up to Jude. And the only two chapters that were left for me to scribe were Jude and Revelation. And then what would happen next, which I didn't know, was I would go into the final big part of my purification period with Laurent, where the I am bad belief died. So this was about what was about to happen. And this is what made the ego come up. Remember, what the theme of the ego attack is stop, don't go any further. This is why the ego decided to arise then with a stop, don't go any further, right? Just like when I was moving from Massachusetts to North Carolina, there was that stop, don't go any further, right? When I believed I fell for all this spiritual crap. That's the theme. So you'll hear that theme rise up. Now let me share my screen. I'm going to show you how to find this. So when you go to the Awakening Together website, awakening-together.org, you will see Regina's audios. You're going to go down to early teachings, snippets from early teachings. That's going to take you to the website, or you could just go to YouTube to the Awakening Together website and look for this playlist, RDA Early Teachings, or you could search for RDA Early Teachings, right? There's many ways to get to this playlist. But when you get to this playlist, notice these videos are all numbered. You're going to go all the way down to video number 165. Ellie's pacing outside the door. She wants in. We'll let her in during the song. 165. It's a beautiful picture of me with crap coming out of my mouth, rainbow crap. And it's called Ego Attack, a Story. So you'll just click on that and whoops. I'm just doing this so I can show you the ego seems to have power over you when you fear it or struggle. Oh, that's a different picture. Oh, that's a different video. I pulled up the wrong video somehow. Let's see, where am I? Well, anyway, it's the one with me with the big red. There it is. There it is. I felt guided. Wait for the picture to show up. It will show up in a second. That's the picture there it is. See that beautiful picture of me? That's the picture you're looking for. So video number, and notice how Jesus is behind me. How cool is that? Remember I said God was in the background working? There's Jesus behind me. That's Muji's painting of Jesus. So look for this video, Ego Attack, a Story, Regina Dawn Akers, The Early Teachings, and then listen to this. And again, listen for those components. Because the reason you're listening for those components is you want to learn to recognize them even when the story is different, because your story is going to be different. All right. And also remember that when a really crazy ego attack shows up, when the ego gets really vicious, it is because you're going somewhere and it's trying to stop you. So although it may seem really bad, it's actually really good. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to allow Marisol to play a song. The song is about the breakthrough, right? Once you've gone through the darkness, the song is the light that you come out into. It's by One Eskimo, and the name of the song is Amazing. And of course, Marisol will also put a link in the chat where you can donate to Awakening Together if you choose to. Marisol, please play the song. Thank you very much, Marisol. So we probably have time for one person to share briefly. Is there somebody who would like to say something after listening to that? It's okay if you don't. Okay, Rhoda. We'll have time for Rhoda, and then we'll probably put Patricia in the next half hour. Go ahead, Rhoda.
I'll just make it very quick. Is it your experience that ego attacks precipitate a sustained seeing? Like
a sustained seeing?
Seeing, yes. Like, purification of a belief happens, or,
yes,
identification falls away.
Yes, there's a breakthrough of some type.
Okay.
Yeah, that's been my experience. But the breakthrough might be, like that very first ego attack that I had when I was moving from Massachusetts to North Carolina. The shift was greater trust. Like I trusted more easily, right? So exactly what the shift is can vary. But that was the shift. That was me putting down full reliance on myself and being able to trust Holy Spirit much more easily. Not perfectly. There was still a growth, right? But there was a definite shift in my ability to trust. So after this ego attack that you guys will watch the video of, what happened there was I now had a certitude that I wanted to move forward, because it was trying to stop, a certitude that I wanted to move forward with the spiritual path no matter what. So that allowed me to move through all that purification stuff with Laurent. If I hadn't had a certitude that I wanted to move forward no matter what, I never would have gone through that relationship, right? I would have quit. So the shifts can be subtle. They're not necessarily letting go of identification with the body, but you will gain something that will help you as you continue. Now, Patricia, as I mentioned, we can put you in the next half hour because we're going into the fellowship program where people can continue to share. But we do like to end our weekly gatherings on time, and it is time. So I just want to thank you all for putting up with me talking about the not so fun side of the story. But it's important. We lost at least one member when he had an ego attack. Didn't recognize it, believed it. His mind told him that we were all demons. And he believed it and he left. Interestingly, he told me about his ego attack, and I came across a story once of Dr. David Hawkins having an ego attack. Their ego attacks were very, very similar, which was kind of funny. The difference was Dr. David Hawkins saw it as an ego attack, didn't believe it, and came out of that and went through the final doorway. So understanding what's happening is extremely helpful. And that's why I wanted to share it with you. That's why Bernadette wrote her book, because she believed that she did not understand what she was going through. She wasn't prepared. That's what she says. And she thinks people would be better off if they were prepared, right? If they understood. So that's what today was all about. All right, I need to go. Y'all continue with fellowship. I turn this over to Marisol.
You've been watching our online gathering. It happens weekly on Sundays at 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. To join us live in the sanctuary, visit our website, awakening-together.org. You'll want to click on Online Sanctuary in the main menu, and then in the drop-down menu, look for How to Enter the Sanctuary. Right there at the top of the page is a clickable link. We'd love to see you in the sanctuary and join with you in fellowship. Thank you again for watching. Also, please know that if you'd like to stay connected via the Awakening Together channel here on YouTube, you can subscribe and hit the bell for more notifications. We hope to see you in the sanctuary.